Hi, I'm Alex Aiden. I'm a 3D environment artist and I'm currently working on the Bernina Line. What's interesting about the Bernina Line from Poschiavo to Turano is it's much shorter than the other lines we've done. It only comes into around 18 kilometers. It's actually more one of the dense lines we've done. There's a lot more detail involved in this line, and we've focused a lot more on trying to get higher buildings that don't only look nice but also are more streamlined to the game. It's one of the more demanding and ambitious projects that we've taken on, but I think the results have come out quite well, and I think the players will be very happy with our results and the final outcome. So one of the more important things when we started this line was looking at general assets and how we could utilise them. Because we were fortunate to have Google Earth, which allowed for a train view, which not all the routes do, it allowed us to get right next to the track view and see the buildings right next to the track. Working with one of my colleagues in the route building, we were able to sit there and pick out things that caught our eyes or small attentions to details, which we formatted into a list and then broke down into the most important things to focus on in this route. During the time we had, we were able to go through it almost in the sense of driving the train itself just by going forward. So we finally combed the area that we went through, being able to pick the most important assets to us. We wanted to try and make it more modular this time around, in a way that we could use balconies and steps to just plug and change into other buildings, which really helped just sell the overall aesthetics a bit more. The idea behind the steps was because it's in quite hilly areas, we were able to use these to help match up with the contour of the roads. Again, with the walls, it really helped with just building the sides of the buildings where it would be quite hard to model that. Instead, we could just drop one of these assets in and come up with our own landscape on how we saw it. The flags also helped quite a lot, just characterise the buildings a bit more, and it helps players realise what area they're in when you are going through the Swiss area straight into Turano, which is the Italian part. The most challenging part was making some of the more general buildings for the Italian area, Turano, just because they have a different character and style to them. It's something different that we've done in the past, so it's trying to find the right character to it and how we go around reusing these multiple times without looking too similar. One of the things we did do was make two different sides. We would have one front where it would show one entrance, and then the other side that would show another entrance. It's something that's really helped with using multiple assets of these buildings. Another thing is the textures. We might reskin the buildings to have different textures but be in the same building, which allowed us to, again, have multiples of these in the same place. And overall, it's not many, but I think it makes up and populates the area quite well. So one of the main things that I worked on for iconic buildings is trackside buildings. One of them was this cafe restaurant in Marilago. It had to have quite a high detail to it, just because it is quite close to the trains, and we wanted our players and viewers to be able to take in the scenery and detail that we put into our buildings. To go around this, the route builders actually start by laying the track for the whole line that we do. This allows me to then come in and take that track and the platforms that are made to rip the geometry and place it into a 3D application. So one of the most difficult things is getting the scale and proportion right of the buildings. One of the great tools in Google Earth is being able to use the measure distance tool. We take one corner to another corner, which allows us to gauge the length and width of a building, so I can then put that in real meters in 3ds Max and match it up to the exact same proportions. One thing we like to do is take this data here and place it into our 3D scenes along with the tracks. Once we line them up, we then have a better understanding on how we're going to lay our building on top One thing I like to do when starting with it is block out some geometry to get an understanding of the weight and proportion of the building. So you can see here it's a very basic mesh that will sit on the platform that would be there, ready to go into more detail. The model itself, I would start very basic. I like to put a roof on and get the angles right. For this building, you can see it's quite angled. It's also made off axis, which the system doesn't prefer. It prefers everything to be modelled on axis, so it makes it slightly more complicated in that regards. Windows is another thing that can be quite hard to work on. It's just getting proportion right for windows, especially when you have many. Another thing to think about is the size of the windows and not to make them look too big or too small. One way I go around making sure they're correct is by just using a small reference, using a cube that's around the same size as an average human person in the game, and then I like to face them out and know where to cut my windows in. One of the main techniques that I like to use when modelling my buildings is the standard for box modelling, which is manipulating a cube into the shape that you require. So for example, I could take a 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter cube, and for the lanterns here that I made, I would then use my reference images offside here to be able to match it up using other features on the building that would give me a scale for this lantern. Using Max's functions, I can start slowly shaping this in. Again, it's kind of almost like making the building itself. You want to start with the basic layout, the basic geometry, and then go in to start working on the details and finer features, such as the faces here. I'm able to manipulate and control all the faces at once. That allows for a very accurate scale of the model. And again, at the same time, we need to be careful of our poly count and not to go over budget with these models. But at the same time, you want to try and push as much detail as you can, possibly in the limitations that we have. In the couple of seconds, we already have a good start to our lantern here. So here's what the final product would look like for this building after going in, cutting windows, placing geometry in the right areas, matching up to our references. Reference is a key point for making these buildings. We actually have someone who goes out on site and will walk the whole length of Postievo to Tirano taking reference images. I like to then make a small bank of these images, which I can use for multiple things such as detail, but also for texturing. So you can see here, I've tried to line up best as possible with the actual world data that we're trying to create. So when we texture our buildings, we like to try and match it up as accurate as possible with the reference pictures. One of those key things is trying to match the right colors as well as scale, but have it so it can tile. This saves a lot on draw calls in game and a lot of data and processing when it comes to making them. One thing I like to do is actually take the images themselves and make new textures in Photoshop. So we will take these and then work on them to make them seamless and tileable so we can use them throughout. I think a lot of the players and fans really appreciate the length we go to try and make it as accurate as we can. One of the things that we do is take the reference data and turn that into the end result for the textures we see. I like to use it in Photoshop. That's how I like to work with the textures. What's great about using these textures is we get to put them into a texture bank, which any of the artists at Rivet Games can use as well, which can help with their projects and speed up time. If they don't need to make a texture or if it looks quite similar, we can just use that one. Because this is a trackside building, meaning it is very close to the track, we want our players to be able to see a lot of the details that they might not normally pick up in other areas. So we like to give a bit more character to these buildings. That means, for me, not just making brick textures, but also having the bricks pop out of the building. That gives it that extra character, as well as giving better framing and trims to windows, making them more ornate, as well as the railings. Another thing we did was adding foliage to the buildings, as seen in the real world references, that helped bring the character more to the building. It just brought it more alive by adding some foliage. So after finishing the lantern, you can see here we've actually applied again one of the reference images into it, which is a 2D texture. What's special about these is they act in the same way the windows do, which is using a light material where the engine will read that material and turn it into a light which you'll be able to see in game for day and night. For example, I can show you here, using these materials, we're able to make one set of windows where they're on at night and another set where they're on in day. When we turn them to night, we can choose which windows we want to light up and which ones we don't. Again, the same applies for our lanterns. We can then give that to the route builders and they can add physical lights on top of the work you've already done to bring more of an atmospheric style to your building with real lighting casting on the building itself, which makes for a nicer result. One of the more interesting things about making buildings is the technical aspect, and that's using materials within the engine that does functions attached to it. So for example, the windows have functions where they can light up and they can also turn off. What we do here is we have one for day and we have one for night. We like to set the ones for day to stay on at day, and this is just a blind texture behind an alpha window. So when you see the windows, the black areas will be alpha'd out and you can see the blinds behind it. The ones for day will stay on obviously for the day, and then when the game changes to night, it will read the night windows where we can set them to have a light material and light up. You want to try and tell a story with your buildings and try and express what that story is being told through purely just the model itself. That's something we try to aim for with all our buildings.